welcome to the Goal Podcast, news and commentary from Gun Owners Action League, your leading voice for the Massachusetts gun owner.
I'm Garrett, across the table from Jeff. What's up, man?
I just got here driving a lot.
Driving all the way from Western New York.
Yeah, I think I've done about 1,000 miles in the last 24 hours.
Man.
Somewhere around there.
Right on. Good but, road stuff, right? Good opportunity to catch up.
Hey, that paycheck's going to look great.
September is starting to cool off. Hunting season's right around the corner.
Yeah, early goose season's already started. So starting to run around. Yeah. But John and I went out, put cameras up, and got some blinds established, and we're going back out next week based on the results of the preliminary camera findings.
The reconnaissance, and then
the recon to maybe put some other stands up, make some adjustments, and we're seeing some deer, and some really good looking deer too.
Yeah.
There's a couple of bucks that we've caught on camera, and everybody has what they find visually appealing about antlers and deer and stuff like that. And John likes height. He likes the tall, maybe a little more narrow and tall. I like the wider sets of antlers. So it works out because we're never really truly competing over the same deer. But getting everything ready for the season. If you are going out and starting to scout, just as a friendly reminder, there are still ticks that are out and about. So if you haven't treated your clothes in a while, make sure you get those sprayed down, something with permethrin in it to make sure you don't get bitten by the bad ones.
Yep.
And best of luck to everybody for their hunting season.
Another PSA is a lot of the people that I hunt with, a lot of friends of mine, are having trouble navigating the new antlerless doe permit system. Like more than one, like 5 or 6 of the people that I know, their antlerless deer permit applications did not carry over to the new login system. So they've had to call Mass Fish Hunt and to get it straightened out. And in 1 or 2 cases, they had no record of it like ever happening at all. So if you got an antlerless doe permit, if you got an antlerless permit, or if you applied for one, or just in general, go in there and make sure that your licenses are straight. Make sure that you got everything. Don't wait until, Thanksgiving.
Yeah, we talked about that back in the spring. The state changed its online portal. So instead of going straight to Mass Fish Hunt and logging in with your existing login, you go through MyMassGov, which is an overarching government database.
Right.
That they use for everything from Mass Health to, SNAP benefits to all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Putting it in a central location, which last time I logged in, they just said you have to accept their new terms of service, by the way. And it says that they are allowed to use all of your information and all of your data and sell it to whoever they want. But you do have to go through, create accounts with them, and go through that whole process. So please do that before the season starts. You definitely don't want to have to do that from a cell phone, from the field with with an animal on the ground that is in need of field dressing.
Make sure that stuff is working before you go out. So also at the end of this summer, the state of Massachusetts has deigned to release a new Approved Firearms Roster. So usually just kind of like keep up on these. It doesn't really have a whole lot to do with us. It's mostly about what people can sell or what dealers can sell. But we're, gun guys, we like to geek out on the new models and see what's here. So we have some additions for August of 2025. First up, Canik. The MC9 Prime is going to run you about $650. This is, another Canik. I happen to like Caniks. I think that they're pretty well built, especially for their price point. I like them.
Yeah, it's a little bit of an off-brand. So if you want something that's not, the standard Ford, Chevy, GM, and you want to go like...
You can go to the dealership down the street, maybe.
Get something a little different. But it's a cool gun. It's cool to see that a lot of features that used to be considered... upgrades, extra
premiums
are now it's just coming that way. So it comes with the forward slide serrations, ported barrel. The sights look great, and Canik usually makes a pretty decent gun. So it looks like it'll be worth checking out.
Yeah, it looks like a good shooter. A new entry on the list, kind of a new entry on the list. This is Daria DY9, MSRP in for about $399. It's basically a stylized Glock clone in 9mm,
I think it's a Turkish manufacturer.
It is, yeah. So this is their first entry on the Massachusetts Firearms Roster. It's a Turkish manufacturer. They were founded in the late 1990s, 1998 or something like that. And they've been growing in the overseas markets, they announced their entry into the U.S. market in 2024 when they opened a 15,000 square foot facility in Jacksonville. So, I mean, 15,000 square feet is not a whole lot. I guess it's like a minor manufacturing and probably more of an import hub than anything else. But hey, it's a location on U.S. soil. So this is like their first foray into the domestic market.
Yeah, they used to be under the Rock Island Armory umbrella.
Yeah, so. They used to be imported by them. So I don't know. I haven't seen one. I haven't shot one, but hey, more guns available makes me happy. So that's the Daria, and it is pronounced Daria, like I dare ya to. So go check it out. Next up, H&K CC9, $700. This is their compact polymer 9mm.
It's kind of like H&K's version of the P365.
Yeah, I think so. All over the website and all over their social media stuff is that they're trumpeting their testing standards to NATO Army Armaments Group AC 225, which is, I guess, a testing standard for NATO. So they're like, buy this gun because we pass these standards. And great. Okay. So go check it out. Kimber KDS-9C. This is the gray-black version. The KDS-9C is already on the roster. This is, I think it's just a color upgrade or a coating upgrade. This is a full-size 1911 clone, 4-inch barrel, single action only. It has a pick rail, optics cut, all that good stuff. And it looks like just a color upgrade to me.
Now, this next one, you might be surprised that I'm rather excited for this next one. But the Smith & Wesson Model 19, they're bringing it back without the god-awful hole drilled in the side.
Back. There's two of them, actually. So it's Model 19 and also the Model 10 Classic. Yeah, so the Model 19 is going to run you about $1,000. Probably the Model 10 will be a little bit less than that. But yeah, these are two K-frame 6-shooters, right? This time they don't have the internal lock or as we affectionately call it, the Hillary hole. The Model 19's in 357 mag. The Model 10 is 38 special, just like always. You know, blued carbon steel, wooden grips, blade sights, no optics. What's not to love? I mean, it's an old style wheel gun.
It's a classic stick shift.
That's right. That's right. The Model 19's been around since like the 50s. Went out of production for a bunch of years and then came back in 2018. The Model 10 is even more venerable. It's been around since 1899 and then pretty much constant production since then with some upgrades. So good to see those guys on the list, especially without the internal lock. Keeping in the Smith & Wesson field, the CSXE series in 3.1 and 3.6 inch barrels run around $700. These are upgrades to the existing CSX, which is already on the roster. So these are hammer fired, single action micro compacts, optics cut, thumb safety, et cetera, and they like to tout their almost straight pull trigger, which, as I recall, was one of the biggest complaints about the CSX, was that it had kind of a junky trigger.
Well,
so
hey,
they're saying that this is an improvement on it.
It's never going to be perfect. We also have the Springfield Armory Echelon. It's going to be retailing anywhere from $650 to $700 as the expected MSRP. Features a manual safety, and what gets me is that they're listed on the roster as low capacity. It's like almost insulting.
Man.
Striker fired 9mm. It's the first gun with Springfield Armory's modular fire control group, called the Central Operating Group, basically their answer to the P320 fire control unit, which houses all of the critical firing components, can be swapped into different grip modules. So that is technically the firearm itself.
Right. That's the part that's serialized. Interestingly, and for absolutely no reason whatsoever, I'm sure, Springfield Armory has incorporated a second sear into the COG module, adding an extra drop safety that is not present in the P320 design. I'm sure there's no reason for adding that particular kind of safety in their fire control module.
Well, we'll see how the Armory Echelon does in the field.
In the field, as far as I can tell, this second sear, which is like another sear that sits above the sear, and they both have to disengage. As far as I can tell, that's a unique implementation among guns. I haven't been able to find another one that does does that way.
Not entirely sure. I'd have to actually like dive in and take a look.
Yeah. And then, last but not least, Staccato for the discerning and independently wealthy shooter. 2 new entries from Staccato. Previously, Strayer Trip International, who became famous for their modular polymer upgrade to the 1911, known as the 2011. STI became Staccato in 2020, and they've been turning out high-end defensive and competition guns ever since. So this guy, the P-Series, is their full-size duty/defense carry gun. It's going to set you back around $2,500.
Yeah, Staccato's, there's commas in those price tags.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I have not had the opportunity to shoot one. I've heard, all good things about them. They're apparently very well built. They're worth, they're built like premium guns.
They're great.
Premium gun is what it is.
If you go through the list and you start looking up all these guns, I mean, the dominant part of the pistol market we're seeing, everything seems to be either a Glock clone or striker fired 9mm polymer frame.
Or it's interesting to see the compact hammer fired guns come back. That's been kind of a trend lately. But anyway,
the people have always chased and always said the trigger from the 1911, the classic 45. Everybody always loved that trigger, but the thing that didn't make it great was the capacity. Then, there were some struggles trying to convert it to 9mm and also get the capacity up while also keeping it reliable.
Yeah.
And it seems like the corner has kind of been turned where what they would consider the 2011, so the 9mm version. More companies are coming out with that hammer fired almost 1911 style in a 9mm pistol that is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So there's, maybe they're starting to bridge the gap. The downside is that they're single action only. So you're carrying, carrying cocked and locked, all for a defensive carry pistol. That's something that you're going to have to, learn, train on, and be comfortable with. But it seems like that's the bulk of where the firearms market is going, is it's either something, 1911 style single action, but all still in 9mm in that family.
Safeties, but everybody's sticking with the 9mm. But I don't know. I think it's interesting. It's interesting because it looks like yes, everybody's making the polymer 9 and a compact, and everybody's making the Glock clone, but they're trying to, I don't know. Some people are trying new things.
Yeah, the hard part's the price tag, though. I mean, Staccatos are great. Yeah. The trigger's great. They fit well.
It would be hard for me to justify that.
But the question is does it shoot $3,000 well?
And it might, but even still, it'd be hard for somebody like me to justify that.
Well, but that's one of those things is what is the end goal of the purchase of the pistol?
Yeah, if I was heavy into competition, something like that, and I was building, if you're out building race guns, you can afford $3,000 for,
Well, if you want a gun that reliably goes bang, you can go find yourself an old Ruger P89.
Yep.
Or, I even have the High Point C9 I bought for under $200, and it's gone bang every time I pulled the trigger. And I've intentionally never taken care of that gun just to see, at what point is it going to fail? So the question is, does that $3,000 really up your game a lot? And I would say that some investment is certainly worthwhile into some level of quality, some things that are nice.
Yeah.
If things like the Staccato, there are some other manufacturers that make those pistols that are in the $2,000 to $3,000 range. And it's one of those things where, if it makes you happy and you can afford it, by all means,
yeah, absolutely.
By all means, go for it.
If you got the cheddar and you want to spend it on that kind of gun, go right ahead.
Yeah. If you don't have the money, or
let me shoot it when we
that's not what you're looking for, then don't buy it. It's really, it's a fairly simple outcome, but it is crazy to see. It's like, we'll use a 9mm pistol for $3,000 that they're marketing for for defensive carry.
Yeah, right. We do have a bit of local news. Mr. Philip Marquis is still going on.
Well, apparently half the country hates Massachusetts and is demanding that the Supreme Court steps in. So sometimes the line between freedom and felony is a matter of feet. So for Philip Marquis, a New Hampshire resident, that line runs through the parking lot of the Pheasant Lane Mall. where an invisible plane exists and crossing into Massachusetts turns a constitutional right into a criminal act, sometimes just a matter of one parking space away. So this case began, for those who don't remember the Marquis case, it started off rather unremarkably. There was a car accident on 495, shocker. Marquis was on his way to work when another driver hit him. The police arrive, and he did what responsible gun owners are often informed to do.
Yeah.
He told the officer that he had a lawfully owned pistol on him. In New Hampshire, that's 100% A-OK. No problem whatsoever. But because he didn't have his Massachusetts issued temporary permission slip, his firearm was seized and he was arrested and charged with carrying without a license, a felony punishable by several years in prison. No violence, no threats, no criminal intent. The difference for him was a matter of geography.
At first, district court dismissed the charges, citing the Supreme Court's landmark 2022 ruling in NYSR PA v. Bruin. That decision held, as we know, that the government must show that any firearm restriction is consistent with the nation's historical tradition of regulation. The judge ruled that Massachusetts failed to meet that standard, but Massachusetts appealed, of course. The Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court reversed the ruling, of course. The SJC argued that Marquis couldn't even challenge the law because he hadn't applied for a permit. Make that make sense. And it upheld Massachusetts' licensing regime, claiming it used narrow, objective, and definite standards consistent with Bruin. So they just make stuff up and they say, no, it's totally...
Yeah. They said, well, he didn't apply for a permit and wasn't denied, so therefore he doesn't have standing to say the law is unconstitutional.
So that's when Marquis, backed by New Hampshire and 24 other states' attorney generals, asked the Supreme Court to intervene.
Yeah, so half the country says Massachusetts has crossed the constitutional line. Like, they have jumped the shark. 25 states.
They went running past the line and showed no sign of slowing.
And threw the finger out the window behind them. So 25 states standing shoulder to shoulder are telling the United States Supreme Court that this isn't just about Philip Marquis or one border or even one gun law. This is about whether states can rewrite the meaning of your civil rights the moment you step onto their soil. That's why this case matters, because if Massachusetts could set its own terms for a federally guaranteed right, what stops any other state from doing the same?
Yeah.
What happens to the promise of a single constitution, a single set of uniting freedoms, if 50 different states can carve it up into 50 different versions? So here's the question. If the Supreme Court doesn't step in to settle this, who gets to decide what your rights are and where they apply? The whole idea of the United States was never just about geography. It's an agreement. So 50 states, 50 different cultures, groups of people, different laws unite under a single promise that some rights are too fundamental to be left up to the whims of any one state. That's what the Constitution is about. That's why we have the Bill of Rights. And the 14th Amendment says that those protections are binding on every state equally, should that state want to be part of the United States. So they're saying your rights aren't supposed to stop at a state border. They aren't supposed to change in the space between Nashua and Lowell or on one side of a parking lot versus another. If Massachusetts can turn a federally guaranteed right into a state-controlled privilege, then what does that say about the meaning of Massachusetts, the union itself?
Yeah, anything.
At its core, it's not just a fight over guns and permits. It's a fight over whether the Constitution travels with you or whether states get to decide where your civil rights begin and end.
So the brief from these states, allied states, argues that Massachusetts' system treats the Second Amendment like a conditional privilege rather than a guaranteed freedom. To legally carry here, a traveler must pay the $100 annual fee, complete a Massachusetts approved safety course, which is, way more complicated now with Chapter 135. And you have to jump through all these hoops in order to be deemed, quote, suitable by the colonel of the Massachusetts
Well, that's
State
in
Police.
addition to being deemed suitable.
Yeah.
You can jump through all the hoops and be perfectly statutorily qualified.
You also have to be deemed suitable by the colonel of the Massachusetts State Police. The whole process can take up to 6 months or even longer for a 1-year license. Do the math on that. The amici states call this pay to delay. arguing that there's no historical tradition of forcing Americans to buy back their rights after enduring some of the most intense scrutiny possible in months of waiting before exercising those rights. The most controversial part of the whole thing is Massachusetts' suitability standard. This rule gives the colonel of the state police broad discretion to unilaterally deny any applicant based on whether they believe the person might pose some risk at an arbitrary point in the future. Critics argue this flips the Constitution on its head, presuming citizens are dangerous and guilty until otherwise proven innocent. You must defend yourself from a crime that hasn't happened and that you haven't committed. It's an impossible task. And part of what drives me nuts about the suitability thing on a state level is the reason that the legislature and the antis justify suitability on a local level is they're like, well, maybe the chief of police knows something about you that, isn't in your criminal record or something. So they should have the ability to have a veto power. The colonel of the state police does know shit about people that don't live in Massachusetts. How is he supposed to know whether somebody who doesn't live here is suitable on a personal level?
Imagine going through residence. Anybody in the country.
Anybody.
300 million people in the United States, and the chief of police, or the Massachusetts chief of police, gets to say, I like this person's name, I don't like that person's name.
The fact that suitability applies at the state, the colonel of the state police's level, to me, throws the whole justification out the window because it just doesn't follow.
The brief compares this approach to pre-crime, like the movie Minority Report, punishing people not for what they've done, but for what the state predicts they might do, maybe, someday.
Maybe.
The amici state points to the Supreme Court's decision in United States v. Rahimi. It rejected laws allowing governments to strip rights based on vague notions of irresponsibility. They argue Massachusetts is doing exactly that, granting unelected officials the power to decide who deserves to exercise a constitutional freedom. The historical record, the states are saying, overwhelmingly supports Marquis' position. Going back to colonial America, laws in Virginia, Maryland, Rhode Island, and even Massachusetts itself often required citizens to travel armed for personal safety. Even in the 19th century, when states began regulating concealed carry, most laws carved out explicit exceptions for travelers. From Texas in 1871 to Indiana in 1831, carrying a firearm while on the move was treated as a necessity, not a crime. By contrast, Massachusetts' modern system criminalizes travelers for conduct that was once expected, if not required, of responsible citizens. So for New Hampshire and other states, it's not just about one man's arrest. It's about whether Massachusetts can create borderline traps where ordinary law-abiding citizens become felons the moment they cross what should be an invisible line as far as civil rights are concerned. As the brief puts it, the Second Amendment is the only right in the Bill of Rights that can instantaneously transform into a felony offense by simply crossing a state border.
That reality has some pretty serious consequences. In places like the Pheasant Lane Mall, which straddles the Massachusetts and New Hampshire border, somebody can carry legally on one side of the parking lot, but face mandatory prison time just a few steps away in the same parking lot. This isn't just a policy disagreement. It's a constitutional gray zone that affects millions of Americans who travel, commute, work across state lines every day. I mean, how far, I live here in North Attleboro. How far from the Rhode Island state border are we? Not very.
10 minutes.
So that is why so many states are weighing in on it. This isn't, Massachusetts versus Philip Marquis anymore. It's Massachusetts versus like half of the country. And here we go with the Supreme Court sitting itself right in the middle.
Yeah, if the court takes the case, any ruling could redefine and possibly correct the balance between state sovereignty and constitutional guarantees for decades or centuries to come. And at stake is whether the Second Amendment travels with you as a federally protected right, or whether states like Massachusetts can force you to surrender your rights at the border. For Marquis, that decision could mean, the difference between freedom and felony conviction. Mm-hmm. But for the rest of the country, it could settle one of the most important constitutional conflicts of our time. When rights collide with state lines, who wins?
The rights.
So until the court weighs in, one thing remains true. What's perfectly legal in Nashua can still make you a felon in Lowell. And when 25 states stand on one side and a single state stands on the other, it's no longer about, guns and licensing and fees. It's whether the Constitution means the same thing everywhere in America.
Yeah. So to put kind of a coda on this, the Attorney General from New Hampshire, John Formella, recently released a statement. He's kind of leading the 25 state coalition of attorney generals in this Supreme Court brief. His statement was the Second Amendment does not end at the Massachusetts border. Citizens should not face criminal charges simply for exercising their constitutional rights while traveling. And that's what we're saying here. But he released his statement. He's recently been in contact with Goal, so the folks at the office were speaking with him, and that's kind of where we are. So we're waiting to see regarding the petition for a writ of certiorari. Goal has also submitted their own amicus brief. So
absolutely,
there we are. That's where we are. Yeah, so
and one would expect
needs to be addressed.
One would expect that 25 state attorney generals signing on to a petition for writ of certiorari would kind of elevate it in the stance of especially in the Supreme Court.
Right down half of the country. You'd think.
But as we talk about the applicability of civil rights, as well as especially suitability is concerned, so there's been a wave of online chatter claiming that the Trump administration Department of Justice is considering a move to ban firearm ownership for anyone who identifies as transgender. So is there any truth to it? Can he, could he, should he? Why should you care? So these rumors began circulating after a disturbing and abhorrent shooting at the Annunciation Catholic School in Minneapolis. It was carried out by an individual who identified as transgender, but then maybe not, maybe they did. Either way.
Whatever.
As always, in the aftermath.
Part of the equation,
anything making national headlines immediately becomes a political point.
Yeah.
So on the right, pundits frame the shooting as proof of broader cultural conflict, blames the trans community, left-wing activists, anybody they see as a part of the war on conservative values. On the left, immediate reaction was a full-scale retreat to their safety blanket of gun control, immediately blaming the firearms community and the gun industry at large, of course. Naturally. In their framing, owning firearms or supporting the Second Amendment is, in and of itself, evidence enough of a cold indifference to innocent life, as though if you refuse to give up your civil rights, you must not care about the victims, or worse, even welcome the destruction. Both sides have made it clear who they want for their audiences to blame, and both see the other as collectively responsible for the actions of one person. What's been most revealing, though, is not the outrage itself, but some of the hypocrisy on display. Within hours of the shooting, some of the loudest voices were quick to insist that we must, first and foremost, not demonize the entire trans community, only to turn around and, sometimes without even pausing for a breath, collectively blame the entire gun-owning community.
Yeah.
At the same time, people who have spent years saying the responsibility lies solely with the person who committed the act are looking at this as justified condemnation of the entire trans community. So, whereas consistency, so many people claim to stand on principle, but principles they are not if they depend entirely on who's in the spotlight.
Exactly. As for the claim that the Trump Department of Justice is preparing a quote-unquote trans gun ban, there doesn't appear to be anything of substance behind it. I've looked, you've looked, we've both looked, Goal has looked. This has been an ongoing topic of discussion since it surfaced. Every source that I found that's making this claim, CNN, ABC News, AP Newsweek, it's always based on unnamed sources, anonymous insiders, people adjacent to people, my aunt's uncle, my aunt's roommate's best friend's niece said so, and they're a janitor at the DOJ, so they must be, it's always, preliminary talks. It's nothing of substance. There's no official statements, no leaked memos, nothing verifiable. It looks a little bit more like rage bait speculation by media outlets that kind of have a history of doing this kind of thing.
Yeah, the value of outrage over accuracy and getting those clicks for those advertising dollars.
Yeah, could it, there's an outside chance that maybe somebody said something to float some kind of a trial balloon in order to gauge public interest in the idea, but I think they've
a rather flippant comment and somebody goes, "Ooh, that would be a juicy news story."
Right. But there's nothing real.
But what we've said, and what I think we've stood by consistently, is that under U.S. law, there are specific conditions that make someone a prohibited person legally barred from owning or possessing firearms. But those restrictions require and necessitate due process in a court of law based on objective standards, actual evidence, and evaluated on an individual basis. That process is essential. It applies equally. It applies to everyone. And anything else is just another form, in my opinion, of the subjective suitability standard that we've been fighting here in Massachusetts. So a categorical suitability ban of an entire group of people exercising their constitutional rights would be blatantly unconstitutional. And I think the DOJ and their civil rights office is probably pretty well aware of that.
Yeah.
But even if the DOJ were seriously talking about this, it would almost definitely become one of the most significant and quickest Second Amendment civil right cases in history.
Yeah, there's no way.
The public outcry, I can't imagine how it would be anything less than total outrage. Courts would be immediately forced to answer a question we've been asking for a while now. Can the government deny fundamental civil rights based on subjectively perceived suitability standards, or should that be done as a result of, individual actions through due process based on objective standards? That kind of blanket "I don't like you" policy would face overwhelming judicial scrutiny and in all likelihood be struck down. While there are plenty of judges and justices who would, I'm sure, love to keep chiseling away at the Second Amendment, I strongly doubt that they are prepared to go so far as to reduce an entire community of people to second-class citizens in order to do it.
Yeah, nobody's going there. We defend the Second Amendment the way that we do because we defend it for everyone. We defend civil rights and civil liberties the way that we do because we defend them for everybody. If the government wants to restrict civil rights, it has to meet that highest burden of proof. It must be applied properly on an individual basis in a court with due process the way that founding documents say it must be. Otherwise, the government can just take civil rights away from an entire group based on nothing. Then who's next? I mean, that's the message that we have to be taking away from this thing. And again, it's important to remember that although this is chatter online, social media, and even in some news outlets, there's nothing solid behind this. And it's also important to remember that every single source on the left and the right, pro-gun, anti-gun, every group that I have seen thus far has come out in vehement opposition to the idea of this ever being a thing. I have not found a single source who says, "Oh, that's a good idea." Not one. But I think you're right. It wouldn't, there would be smoke in the room by how fast this thing got shot down by Constitution. Yeah, there's no way. Oh, the P320. The P320. Just real briefly, because we got hanging on this P320 thing again. Yeah, but the Air Force has done has finished up some of their homework.
Yeah, the U.S. Air Force completed their investigation of the P320 actually a couple weeks ago. On August 24th, 2025, U.S. Air Force Global Strike Command released the findings of its investigation into the M18 pistol following the tragic death of Airman Braden Levon. In late July of this year, Levon, if you recall, was fatally struck by a bullet from his M18, the military designation of the P320, in what was initially suspected as an uncommanded discharge, leading the organization to suspend the use of the service pistol pending an internal investigation. This was a giant bucket of gasoline thrown into the fire surrounding the P320 and the decade plus of suspected safety issues with its design. And now we have some findings. So according to the Air Force, they conducted and I'll put the air quotes around this, comprehensive inspection of all 7,970 M18 modular handgun systems in their inventory over roughly a 30-day period. 8,000 guns in 30 days.
Wow.
They were unable to replicate uncommanded discharges. However, the investigation uncovered discrepancies in 191 firearms, citing component wear as the primary issue. The most frequent problems involved the safety lever, the striker assembly, and the sear.
Yeah.
According to the release, firearms exhibiting these discrepancies were immediately tagged and pulled from service for necessary repairs. As part of its corrective measures, the Air Force also announced enhanced inspection procedures for the M18 pistol, including additional checks focused specifically on the areas where these potential issues were discovered.
So by August the 25th, the Air Force had resumed use of the M18 pistols that passed inspection and began briefing personnel on the investigation's findings. These briefings included explanations of the enhanced inspection protocols, reinforcement of muzzle discipline, and reminders about procedures for reporting, firearms of concern. In response, Sig Sauer issued a statement applauding the Air Force's investigation, saying they've valued the findings as a further confirmation of the M18 safety, reliability, and durability, of course, and expressed hope that the report would ease concerns among ranges, training facilities, and organizations that have stopped using or outright banned the P320 and its variants. So in the tug of war, the knot has gone slightly back towards Sig Sauer's side.
Well, I mean, all right, let's unpack what just happened. So SIG and supporters of the P320 are understandably kind of treating this report as vindication. Yeah. But I wouldn't exactly rush to call this a total clean bill of health either. So looking at the timeline, there's 34 calendar days between the airman's death and the release of this report. So assuming a few days on either end, setup, admin, you're talking 30 days for the Air Force to fully inspect 8,000 pistols.
Yeah, I don't know.
Collecting, inspecting, redistributing. I mean, it's not impossible, but you have to ask, like, okay, how thorough is the inspection? What all did they do? Did they just look at it? Did they test them? And for that many firearms over that short of a window, exactly how in the weeds could they really get?
I don't think that I'm all that concerned about. I mean, it's not like they packed up all the 8,000 pistols and sent them to Dover for 3 people to test. I'm sure that they promulgated some kind of testing procedure, probably the acceptance procedure from when they first, did that. And then a lot of repetition. And then they sent that around to all the different bases and all the different places. So I don't know, if you break it up that way, you can imagine, base armorers dealing with these things on a close to individual level, but
it's a large volume of work.
It is still a volume of work.
But there's a number that the report kind of glossed over, and SIG certainly didn't bring up, and it's that they found 191 pistols pulled from service with issues significant enough to take them out of rotation, and they needed to go back for repair. That's just under 2.5% of their entire inventory, and it's not cosmetic issues or minor scuffs. They're problems with safety levers, striker assemblies, sears, precisely the components that would be involved in an uncommanded discharge, and precisely the components people have been talking about. So does a 2.5% failure rate in critical safety components really sound like the safest, most advanced, most reliable handgun in the world, which last I checked on the website, it's still SIG's claim?
Again, from a devil's advocate standpoint, those were pulled from service. They identified potential issues with those 191 pistols, which is a lot. Okay. At the same time, with any pistols, they were unable to replicate the uncommanded discharge. Is that true?
That's my understanding from the report.
Uncommanded discharges out of the 8,000 pistols.
It also didn't specify what their inspection was. So did they load them and throw them against the ground? Did they load them and throw them against the wall? Or did they just open them up and look and say, does this look right? Does this not look right?
No idea.
And remember, this investigation covers the Air Force's relatively controlled inventory, and we're assuming that SIG isn't sending the military their factory seconds.
No.
So if the Air Force found a 2.5% failure rate, issue rate, where they had to pull firearms out of service, what does that mean for the estimated 2.5 to 3 million P320s out in the wild?
Yeah.
You're looking at 60 to 75,000 pistols potentially having issues significant enough that the Air Force would have pulled them from use until repaired. So, and it's not hypothetical. Other agencies have faced similar problems. The Michigan State Police had to send an entire batch of pistols back to SIG after receiving them without a spec triggers. And SIG never denied that. Mm-hmm. And one of those pistols, after it was repaired, was the one that ended up in the FBI's ballistic research facility following its involvement in an suspected uncommanded discharge. And the FBI found concerning wear patterns on critical components in that firearm. So, even if you give SIG every benefit of the doubt, and you dismiss all the individual accounts, the homegrown tests, the YouTube videos, and you accept that as either user error or anti-gun shillery, you're left with hard numbers. So SIG claims the P320, its variants, are the best, safest, most advanced, and most robust pistol in the world. And here we have their most important customer reporting 2.5% or 2.5% had to be pulled out of service for repair. So that's not trivial. That's statistically significant. Maybe not enough for the Air Force or the military to ditch the pistol entirely, but certainly enough that they felt compelled to change their inspection protocols and reporting procedures just to account for the risk. So, public statements frame this investigation as vindication. The numbers may tell a different story depending on how you view it. At best, I'd say this is probably not the win SIG wants it to be. But at worst, I think there's some confirmation that there's still some deeper issues that haven't been resolved, and it doesn't seem like there are any broad-scale plans to fix it. Now, to be fair, any product produced in large enough quantity is going to have some defects. That's why the whole world of QC, quality control, quality assurance exists. But that's to catch problems before they reach the end user. So, in the real world, nothing's perfect. Some level of failure is inevitable. But, but that poses the real question. That's one that SIG has not answered, but you have to for yourself, is what is an acceptable failure rate for you? And more importantly, it's like, are you willing to bet your life on it?
So these are fair questions. And I have to, again, take the devil's advocate position here. I am not defending SIG, but when you're talking about numbers like this, and you have to, in my opinion, have to ask the follow-up questions. If you have a 2.5% rate of pistols, out of the corpus of pistols, 2.5% of those had to be pulled for repair. We don't know, as far as I'm aware, we don't know why exactly they were pulled. Are they manufacturing defects? Are they defects in, cleaning and maintenance? Are they wear and tear? We don't know. I don't think that we know.
Well, the investigation reported component wear.
Okay.
As the issue.
That means
most frequently being safety lever, striker assembly, and sear.
Yeah. So is that, and we also don't know, is that unusual levels of wear? Is it a matter that these are defective from the factory and these are, death machines and they should be pulled from the market? Or is it, these 191 pistols or some subset of them had been in the field for a long time. And because of the new inspection procedures, these fell out because they're like, okay, there's wear and tear here that we weren't looking for before, but now we are. And so now we got to pull these off the line. And, again, not defending SIG. I don't know what's going on the inside, but I'm talking about manufacturing, failure rates, things like that, right? It's important to ask the follow-up questions. I don't know. What I'm saying is I don't know, but I'm also saying that being pulled from service doesn't necessarily mean that there's an imminent danger. Because 191 pistols were pulled from the line for wear and tear doesn't necessarily mean that 191 pistols came from the SIG factory defective. Hey, we preach in classes that guns are machines, right? Machines have failure points. They're prone to wear and tear. Is SIG's stuff defective? Is it a bad design? Is it wearing out too fast? I don't know. But you're right in saying that this is not a complete vindication, no matter what SIG says. It's not.
It's the juxtaposition of the issue rate that they had with it, the change in procedures they now have to make, with the claim that this is proof positive that this is the best damn thing that's ever come out of a gun manufacturer ever.
I'm never gonna be on board with the superlatives from like SIG and from any manufacturer really, but SIG has been
everybody's either anti-gun or anti-company for saying anything bad about it.
Absolute agreement. They have a lot to answer for with making comments the way that they have. Absolutely. So continuing the series on American service rifles, here we are. It's the second, just about the time of the second conflict with the British. We're in the early 19th century now.
Yeah, it's so funny going back and looking through the timeline of how many different rifles there were early on, and then as you get later, the service life of firearms grows longer and longer and longer. And, evolution of designs.
Yes. But also in keeping with the military theme, and this goes to something that you just said recently, there's a certain inertia as well. So the life of the service rifle gets longer, but so does the bureaucratic inertia behind them.
But throughout the course that we've gone, there's been a series of steady, deliberate steps. So, the Brown Bess and the Charleville weren't necessarily about innovation. They were about survival. You ran what you brung. Then, you had the Springfield 1795, Harper's Ferry 1803, 1814, 1817 common rifles, small but important milestones along the way. And those rifles represented more of an American learning to stand on its own, developing the capacity for self-sustained arms production, and mastering the basics of manufacturing and logistics at scale. So those were more evolutionary changes instead of revolutionary changes. Sourcing materials, refining techniques. But then came the 1819 Hall Breechloader. And I think this is where the story changes, because this is the first time I think we see a bold step forward in the design of the firearm itself, not just necessarily the manufacturing techniques, that also didn't just improve the firearm, but redefined how it could be used.
Oh, yeah. You had to rewrite the manual.
Yeah, it was kind of a turning point where, the American ingenuity stepped beyond imitation and began reshaping the future of warfare and the industry itself.
So paint the picture. It's 1819. America's less than 50 years old at this point, still a young republic, finding its footing. The frontier pushes westward, tensions, simmering with European powers. The U.S. Army is small, underfunded, still learning how to project force across a huge and untamed continent. On the battlefield, soldiers fight with muzzle-loading muskets, the same technology their fathers carried during the Revolution. These guns are slow, clumsy, unforgiving under fire. To reload, the soldier has to stand exposed, biting open a cartridge, pouring powder, seating the ball, ramming it home, priming the pan, all while enemy fire whistles overhead, hopefully overhead. In the best of conditions, a skilled man can manage 2, maybe 3 shots a minute. And then John Hall appears, offering something that nobody asked for, but everybody was eventually going to need. It's a rifle that broke the rules. His idea was deceptively simple. Instead of loading from the muzzle, he designed a rifle that opened from the breech, the rear of the barrel. A soldier could drop a paper cartridge straight into the chamber, close the breech, and fire. You cut the reload time nearly in half. So no more ramming, no more seating, no more any of that stuff. You break it open, set the cartridge, close it, and you're ready to go.
Yeah, you'd have to, it's hard to describe. You'd almost have to find a video of it online. But if you think of a traditional chamber and barrel all together, usually where it breaks is at the back of the chamber.
Yes.
And the whole cartridge loads in that way. This one, the break was at the front of the chamber where the chamber met the barrel, and it would tip up. So you would load it from
the front,
from the end opposite from your face.
Yes.
But you just into the chamber where it was significantly quicker and easier.
You loaded it towards you. But
just into the chamber, and then it would flip back down. So to us, I mean, it sounds kind of obvious. You know, why don't you load it from the end closest to the operator? But to the U.S. Army in 1819, it was kind of unthinkable. I mean, breechloaders had been tried before, but they were unreliable. They were kind of prone to gas leaks, and traditionalists looked at them as gimmicks, you know, the toy for the inventor and the tinkerer, but not a serious firearm for soldiers. But you know, after extensive testing, the Army took the gamble. The M1819, as it would become, the Hall breechloader, became the first standardized, mass-produced breech-loading firearm adopted by the U.S. military. Quiet revolution, but one with consequences far beyond the battlefield. So, on paper, the M1819 doesn't sound all that impressive. It was 10 plus pounds, 52 and a half inches overall length. So she's not exactly svelte, not exactly slim and trim.
Certainly not by today's standards.
The 32 and a half inch barrel was rifled with 16 clockwise grooves with a 1 in 96 twist. So that's one revolution for every 96 inches that bullet was going to travel. And it used 100 grains of black powder to fire a .525 caliber round ball, and it had a published effective range out to about 150 yards. Mm-hmm. It still used a flintlock design, although some were eventually converted to percussion lock. But to understand kind of what made the Hall so disruptive, so I mean, rifles existed.
Yep.
Muskets existed, but you have to think about the tactics at the time. So American soldiers were drilled in European-style formations. So disciplined lines, firing volleys in unison. With smoothbore muskets, accuracy wasn't the point. It's about volume. You know, like you say, it's you shot at the enemy, not
an enemy. Yeah.
But Hall's rifle kind of changed the equation. It was rifled, meaning the barrel imparted spin on the bullet, improved range, improved accuracy. But with breech loading, soldiers could not only reload faster, but they could reload quickly in the prone position.
Yeah, you don't have to stand up handling your ramrod and all the rest of it.
Once you were down behind cover, you didn't have to expose yourself to reload.
You could stay there.
The ability to fight from behind cover is a remarkable shift in tactics that really suited the irregular small unit skirmishes common on the frontier. But, you know, innovation doesn't come without compromise. So the seal, the Hall breech didn't seal perfectly, so often gas would escape when it was fired. And, you know, not only is it distracting to get, you know, hot gases blown back in your face, but the lack of seal also meant that you lost power too. And it was ultimately slightly less powerful than some traditional muskets that, you know, it was just basically a sealed off pipe at the end. You know, and add to it being a new technology, not everyone trusted it, but still for soldiers fighting, you know, ambushes and raids in dense forests and river valleys of the America's, you know, frontiers and the borders and edges, speed mattered more than perfection.
What truly set the Hall apart, though, is it's not just a rifle, but the way it was built. At Harper's Ferry, Hall pioneered precision machining on a scale that America had never yet seen before. He insisted on interchangeable parts. Every breech block, every trigger assembly, every screw machined to tolerances that were unheard of for the time. This idea is not just clever gunsmithing. It was the birth of a new industrial philosophy. If any part, this is the ideal anyway, if any part could be swapped with another one, rifles could be repaired faster, production could scale, costs would drop. That's the modern manufacturing system. This became the foundation of what historians call the American system of manufacturing, also known as the armory system. Go figure. An idea that would ripple outward from Hall's workshop to touch everything from Sam Colt's revolvers to Ford's assembly lines a century later. The Hall breechloader served U.S. soldiers on the Western frontier during the Seminole Wars and in small-scale conflicts where mobility meant survival. By the time the Mexican-American War in the 1840s, newer percussion cap systems and more efficient breechloaders began to kind of overtake Hall's design. Technology moved on, as it always does. And yet the Hall left something behind, something larger than itself. It forced the U.S. military and the nation as a whole to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes you have to trust an imperfect idea to unlock a better future.
Yeah. Now, in today's world, the M1819 Hall Breechloader is, kind of a relic that sits quietly in museums. It's overshadowed by some of the famous rifles that followed. But if you trace the lineage of American firearms, Sharps and Springfields and Winchesters and AR platforms, you can find Hall's fingerprints kind of all over the place. It was the first U.S. military firearm to challenge the muzzle loading orthodoxy. It was the first to prove that precision manufacturing could really reshape it. And perhaps most importantly, the Hall represents something, more uniquely American. And it was the willingness to bet on the unproven, to question old truths, and to risk failure in pursuit of something better. So it wasn't perfect. It wasn't the final word, but in its own unique way, the Breechloader bent the arc of innovation, and America never really looked back. And with its implementation, the muzzle loader's days were numbered. Can't imagine. It's like, I can just reload. I don't have to stand up to reload.
What a paradigm shift.
Really, I mean, it's huge.
Yeah, it's big. You rewrite the manual of arms, right? You rewrite the whole book,
all your unit,
the book of war.
Your unit tactics change.
Yeah. That's going to do it for today. Thanks for listening in. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the show. Share it with friends. Check us out on Facebook at facebook.com/GoalPodcastMA, on YouTube at The Goal Podcast, or on Twitter at Goal Update.
To join Goal, visit goal.org and click the Join Renew button on the top of the homepage.
If you have a topic you think we should cover, if there's something going on in your club or your town, or if you have a question for the mailbag, shoot us an email at goalpodcast@goal.org.
The Goal Podcast is a production of Gun Owners Action League of Massachusetts. The views and opinions expressed are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect those of Goal, its staff, or affiliates.